Hello, Curious, and welcome back. It seems that recently a lot of people are talking about the brand new Netflix miniseries Halston about the life of American fashion designer Roy Halston Frowick. A few figures have made more of a significant impact on American fashion than Halston, and his clean, minimalist, and functional garments were hugely popular throughout the 70s and 80s, and the designer had become known for creating a relaxed urban lifestyle for American women, and not to mention that the man had become a true celebrity thanks to his affiliation with other high-profile stars at the time. So who exactly was the man behind the fashion, and which famous people could he call his friends, and what notable figures had worn his clothes, and which artists did he have a relationship with, and why did it cause controversy? How did the man who now has a Netflix series about his life lose the right to his own name, and why has the series caused controversy with the designer's family? Stay with us until the end to find out all the problems about the fashion designer and the person behind the brand. But before we continue, don't forget to turn on the notifications and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our future videos. In the Netflix series, the designer is played by none other than Ewan McGregor, that many associate with the role as Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars prequels. But before we get to talking about the Netflix show, let's look at the person behind the clothing label. Roy Halston Frowick was born on April 23rd of 1932 in Des Moines, Iowa. Even back then, his family would call him Halston so not to confuse him with his uncle Roy. But by the late 1940s, he would become his mother and sister's personal milliner, as he possessed a talent and an eye for beauty, and soon he had begun creating interestingly shaped hats for all of his family members. His love for sewing developed during childhood too, and he found himself altering clothes for members of the household. When he was 14, his family moved to Indiana, and there he attended the Indiana University in 1952. However, after only one semester, he realized that it wasn't for him, and he moved to Chicago and began taking night classes at the School of Art Institute to improve his craft. And by day, he worked as a fashion merchandiser for the Carson Peary Scott department store, and he first made his mark on the local fashion scene in 1957 when his hats went on sale at the City Boulevard Salon. Influential fashion editor Diana Vreeland had commented on his hat-making skill in the book Simply Halston, saying he was probably the greatest hat maker in the world, an absolute magician with his hands. He achieved that with the help of a well-regarded hairdresser, Andre Basil, who owned a high-end salon at the Ambassador Hotel, and he was first to display Halston's hats, which proved to be popular among the women of Chicago. When Basil expanded into another space, he gave Halston half of the shop to showcase his hats, and this helped the young designer expand his reach. The two men were also suspected to have been in a relationship, and as their relationship began to crumble, Halston had dreamt of moving to the Big Apple. And so, by 1959, he made his dream come true and moved to New York City, where he worked as a designer for the esteemed milliner Lily Dash. In less than a year, his designs became popular among the Manhattan crowd. His whimsical themes and use of fringe, jewels, and flowers made him stick out from others, and not long after, Bergdorf Goodman had hired him as the head designer for his department store's hat section. With the prestige of luxury department under his name, high-end clientele soon began to notice him, and his first client was a big one as the fashionista Jacqueline Kennedy herself, who had asked Halston to design the pillbox hat that she wore at JFK's inauguration in '61. And my curious, the rest is history. Jackie had brought a lot of attention to the designer, and soon his career had boomed, and in the late 60s, he had branched out in his own and opened a boutique in Manhattan. It was then that he began experimenting with other types of clothes, and in an interview with the designer, he did once explain the reason behind his designs and said the point is to be comfortable. If you have nice legs, by damn you want to show them. We have to abandon the idea that we all have to look alike. We have to do what's best for ourselves, and that's the secret of fashion. And where his outfits were concerned, while he didn't invent it, he had pioneered the use of the ultra suede, and he made hybrid shirt-waist dresses that had been inspired by men's dress shirts. And it was also worth noting that in the early stages of his brand, Halston's clothes were for women and men, which had made him one of the first to design a unisex collection, though later on he would go on to create a separate menswear line. Though his work was not commercially successful, but it was also critically acclaimed, as he won 4 Cardi Awards throughout the 60s and 70s for his work in millinery and fashion. And on top of all that, he was inducted into the City Hall of Fame in 1974. While some designers are known to work with some models over and over again, this designer had his own posse of favorite models that had become known as the Halstonettes, and the group included Pat Cleveland, Angelica Hudson, Beverly Johnson, and more, and it was specifically known for its diversity as Halston was the first designer to feature models of various races in his show. They not only appeared in campaigns and on the runway for the designer, but also traveled with him and attended his parties. And when it came to parties, that also meant famous friends. It is worth to mention that Kennedy wasn't his only famous client. This designer had also worked with such famous stars, which included Rita Hayworth, Marlene Dietrich, and the aforementioned Diana Vreeland, Elizabeth Taylor, and more. He also had many famous friends with them, and they often frequented at the Studio 54. And there he was often seen with other famous regulars such as Bianca Jagger, Liza Minelli, and Andy Warhol. But while he partied like most of the elite did in those times, which meant long and hard, his nights out had also influenced his approach to design, and one that would later go on to define the glamorous disco fever of the 70s. In fact, Minelli and Halston were good friends. It was her godmother, Kay Thompson, who introduced her to the star and to the designer, setting up an appointment in his studio. In a later interview, Minelli would recount their first meeting, saying, "We got along instantly, and he became my fashion mate." Soon enough, she was joining him at 101, his 101 East and 63rd Street home, which played clubhouse to the city's creative elite, which includes the aforementioned celebrities. It was Halston who had hosted infamously decadent white-themed Studio 54 party in honor of Jagger, and that was the one where Minelli and Jagger were snapped releasing white doves. Around that time, he had also met his long-term boyfriend. In '72, he met a young Venezuelan man who went by the name of Victor Hugo. It didn't take long for the pair to begin to live together, and soon Halston had brought him into the fashion business to dress the windows of his boutique. This had caused controversy in some way because a previous boyfriend of his, Ed Austin, also held the job but was abruptly fired. And according to Stephen Gaines, who wrote the biography Simply Halston, his and Hugo's relationship was often chaotic, though many had attributed the designer's eventual downturn to his boyfriend. As per then Vanity Fair, Hugo enabled the high-octane party lifestyle that Halston found through Studio 54, and had a volatile personality of his own, even painting over some of Warhol's original portraits and eventually stealing art from Halston's home. Fashion journalist Andre Leon Talley talked about Victor and in an interview said that the Venezuelan call boy was his downfall, and he was a grifter who clung on like a parasite, like a barnacle on a ship. Though while we're talking about fashion and how there is a dark side of things, why not head over to our brand new channel CURIOSIPS WOW to check out our new video about the dark side of the industry and the secrets behind the most famous brands. Despite any problems he might have had with his relationship, at the time his career was booming, but soon it fell into jeopardy. In '73, he sold his company to Norton Simon Inc. for roughly $12 million in stock, and Gaines had also pointed out that at the time, the designer seemed to be more on edge and quick to lose his temper, which he accredited to the use of illegal substances on a regular basis. And then in 1981, JCPenney had approached Halston for a collaboration, and so he developed a more inexpensive Halston 3 line for the department store, and that turned out to be a bad move as it backfired on him when other partners at luxury stores like Bergdorf Goodman had dropped his main collection because of his association with the mid-tier department store. Roland Ballister, who produced the Halston documentary, commented on this saying, "The fashion world took it as a grave offense. It wasn't just, okay, we're going to slowly ease you out because you've changed the direction. This was very dramatic. We're done with you." It didn't take long for this to have a more negative effects on his career, as 1 year later he was fired from his own company and he had lost the rights to use his own name. So for the next few years he got by designing costumes for Liza Minnelli, who had remained his friend until his passing only 7 years later. In 1988 he had tested positive for HIV, and after his health began to decline, he moved to San Francisco where he was cared for by his family. He passed away from Kaposi sarcoma on March 26th of 1990. Following his passing, many had tried to recreate the luster and innovative nature that was once present in the Halston brand. In 2013, Halston was reinvented by Halston Heritage, and it is under the baton of industry veteran Ben Malka, who sits at the brand's chairman and chief executive officer. To commemorate the life of the designer, who sometimes is forgotten over the names of other designers such as Karl Lagerfeld and Kenzo Takada, about whom we also have a video, Netflix had decided to make a series about his life, and in the show that premiered premiered on May 14th, Halston is played by the aforementioned Ewan McGregor, Krista Rodriguez as Liza Minelli, and Gianfranco Rodriguez as Victor Hugo. While many were eager to watch the miniseries and talking about this fashion designer, it turns out that his own family might have not been too happy. On May 10th, a statement was released from the Halston archives which expressed the family's disapproval, calling the series an inaccurate, fictionalized account of Roy Halston Frowick's life. And it turns out that neither of his family or the representatives of the archives were consulted about the project. In the statement they said, the Halston archives remain the only definitive and comprehensive source on the man and his legacy, as he personally appointed a custodian of his private papers and the effects. And speaking with Town and County magazine, Leslie Frowick, Halston's niece and CEO and founder of his archives, further explained, "The producers of this miniseries on our beloved Uncle Halston did not contact or secure the authorization from the Halston archives or family, thus it is unauthorized." So curious, tell me, what are your thoughts on this designer? Did you know about his life, and were you aware of the amount of famous friends that he had? Do you know any items from the Halston collection? And what are your thoughts on the Netflix series? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.